Direct Set 808 Productions
presents The Beat Factory. Welcome to The Beat Factory. Take a seat, have a sat. This is Lukefahr. We're going to talk about some music today. We're going to talk about the UK band Alt.J and their debut album from 2012, An Awesome Wave. Alt.J, they're an indie pop, alt pop band. I would describe them as kind of a mixture of Fleet Foxes, Sublime, Philip Glass, and electronica, which is kind of I'm sure that doesn't make any sense, but by the end of our discussion, I think it'll make perfect sense. So Alt.J is made up of four people: Gil Sansbury, Joe Newman, Tom Green, Gus Unger Hamilton, and they have an interesting story, each one of them. They met in Leeds University. They met up with the other members of the band. Gus Unger Hamilton, I think he has an important role to play in the artistic direction of Alt.J. And things I want to point to on first of all, we'll start saying that I enjoyed this album a lot for a lot of reasons, because I think I understood where they're approaching it. They're not afraid of leaving space in their music, which is something a lot of bands don't do these days, or at least they don't take advantage of space being used as a tool to create tension. And this band, when the lead singer, he does this nasally singing. If you ever heard the band Clouded, that's kind of what I always kind of compare that to. People probably think they're not very good singers. However, I think they can sing incredibly well, also in that nasally timbre. And they use a lot of repetitive riffs. I kind of want to call them a groove band for numerous reasons, because they're always building on these simple ideas that build into these just like really catchy tunes that you can listen to over and over again. And they also have this willingness to use unusual sounds. They're not afraid to have samples of just random noise, but finding a way to fit it into their soundscape that they're creating. Now, to really understand how I'm approaching this album, I think we get to do a little bit of a history lesson. Referring to, I think the best way to describe the sound that Alt.J has in their debut album is minimalist. Now what's minimalist mean? Well, I'm referring to the art term minimalism, where you kind of bring everything back down to simplicity, but then the way that the music scene uses that term is slightly different. So in the 60s, this is kind of where they coined the phrase minimalist music. It was an art music movement, kind of started by a bunch of people, but the big names are Steve Reich and Philip Glass, and it originated in the New York downtown scene, where they were trying to go against the really experimental noise generating music, expressionism, a lot of rules being tied down. For anybody who's a student of music composition, the progression of concert music, it went into a place, at least in my opinion, where the creating a new and interesting sound, that was what was the goal. It no longer was about it sounding good. It was no longer about creating interesting musical ideas. And so this movement, that's what they're trying to go back to. There's some things that they point to as an aesthetic. Minimalist music it's non-narrative, meaning there's no goal in mind. We're not trying to start from A and go to B. They point to it as being non-theological and non-representational in its conception. A lot of big words. It's an art movement with using music, but they do these things with a constant harmony, and they focus on steady pulse. So sometimes there'll just be a drone going on and over again. They use gradual transformation. So you could have, basically, an example would be you'd have a chord progression of 1-5-1, meaning you're going from the tonic to the dominant and going back, but you could take 30 minutes. That would be one example. But you would have like a kind of a theme, a motif, if you will, and you would just be repeating that, doing very, very, very slight changes until you get to the next chord you're trying to build up, and then you keep doing that and kind of build it back. And the reiteration of musical phrases, that's what I point to when I hear Alt.J. If you want to know more about this kind of stuff, there's a book written by Mark Prendergast. It's called The Ambient Century, From Mahler to Trance: The Evolution of Sound in the Electronic Age. That's actually a really interesting book, and it's kind of talking about how did you get from these really complex chord thick compositions into trance music, where you can just have just kind of like a drum track going on for 5 minutes, and there's maybe just a drone going on in the background, and we're going to call that a trance beat. I'm like, okay, I'll dance to it. An important thing to note, that I think the reason I can point to minimalism as a strong influence on this band Alt.J is because these guys, or at least for Gus Unger Hamilton, he went to a choral high school, like it was an art school, and so he's classically trained. So I know he knows this stuff, and you can hear it in the music. Also, his brother is the head of A&R for Polydor Records, and Gus is an English major, so that means he reads. You know, he's gonna be pulling from a whole bunch of stuff. If you listening to the music, you hear the counterpoint. You hear these compositional techniques that you're like, oh wow, yeah, that guy went to school for music. Another thing is that Tom Green, apparently he's like 80% deaf. He's the drummer, so that makes sense when you break down why a lot of the drum tracks on this album are kind of sparse. Perfect example, we'll get right into it, is the intro track. It starts out with the little piano thing going up, this motive that's just going over and over again, which is, I'm pointing to the Philip Glass influence of you setting up these cells. You do, all right, we're gonna have one piece of it, and you keep adding on top of it, and then without care or worry, you can switch to another cell, another motive, without having to throw in some fancy choral progressions, because it's more about the groove, it's more about the space you're creating. That intro, the drum track is just so sparse. It kind of reminds me of the Green. That kind of like, they make that like that Cali rock sound, like Sublime, you know. But you don't expect that from the way it starts, because it sounds like really, I don't know, they got this piano going on, so it's sounding kind of classical, and then you turn in and you get the lead singer singing that nasally technique. You're like, whoa, I was not expecting any of this. And then the bass coming in at the same time as the vocals, it completely changes the vibe. You're like, oh, was not prepared. And after the intro, they have an interlude, track 2. But what's crazy, that was another crazy surprise, because that's a vocal a cappella piece. But what it is, it's pulling from Gregorian chant. It's a cantus firma. What that is in the 13th century, you would have the Gregorian chant. You would have that one line, everybody was singing it. Well, the new hip thing in the 13th century was polyphonic music. So you would have somebody sing something different on top of your musical line. That was a revolutionary thing, that we could sing two different things at the same time. And you could hear the counterpoint in the interlude. And I know that guy Gus, he's the one doing it. That's where he's pulling this from. He's probably making those guys listen to music they've never heard of. Which another thing, I was not listening to this album. I was like, wow, this is such an interesting collection of sounds. But it sounds indie pop. It's just so strange. But then to be able to recognize it, man, there's a lot of compositional technique in this thing. So I had to do the research. Like, who the hell went to school? Like, who understands how to do this stuff? And after you do this cantus firma thing with the Gregorian chant, which is basically a church music technique from the 13th century, the next song, Tessellate, it starts out with this banging on the piano that sounds like church bells to me. And I'm like, man, you guys are smart. I know what you're doing. Making me think. I had to look up the word tessellate. Tessellating is a math term where basically it means when things fit together. And if you listen to the lyrics, he's basically talking about sex. Which goes back that Gus, he's also an English major. So their lyrics are so incredible. They use the same technique that they do with the music, where they're building cells and motifs. You've got you got like an A part, like one part, and they'll just kind of put right next to it the B part. Maybe or maybe not, it has relationship to the previous, but somehow it just creates these really interesting spaces for you to kind of like lose yourself in these grooves they're creating. The song Tessellate, going back to like a lot of these tracks, the drum tracks are just so simple, but they give them a lot of space to do the experimenting they're doing with the vocals and with the nasally, the experimentation with the nasal vocals. I was listening to a podcast. It's called Song Exploder. And what they do is they interview bands, and they'll play a song and they'll say, hey, how'd you make this song? And they break down the way they make it in terms of, so we started with this piece and then we added on this piece of instrument. We didn't like that, so we did this. And what they keep talking about is that they're not afraid to use old, terrible pianos, old, terrible synths. Like they're saying that he found a piano like in the trash basically. And it was one of those really cheap, crappy pianos that you kind of buy for like, a kid. It's like $100, like in the back of Walmart. But apparently there was a setting on there that they thought that's an incredible piano sound. Well, let's just use that. And when I heard that, I thought, man, these guys are incredible. Who would think to not, you're in a studio, somebody's paying you studio time to have all the best equipment that you have your hands on. And you're like, you know what? I want to use a $100 piano because it sounds better. You know what? I'm going to use that really old drum machine that no one would ever use because the snares are so dead. I always respect bands that will focus on sound rather than the toy. Sometimes you'll find bands that, look, we have access to this new toy now, so we can use this new technique, and then they overuse it, or they're not using it the way it should be intended. Meaning, it sounds like, oh, hey, you guys got a new toy, huh? That's not exciting for me. I don't find enjoyment in listening to somebody experiment with something and then do it wrong. wrong. I mean, what does that mean? Well, you hear it. If it's wrong, it's wrong. But Tesla's a great example, going back to the idea of the minimalism where they're building on top. So they do that little 1-2 drums, just the drum, the kick and the snare, but then they just keep putting in more layers. They put the guitar, it's a riff coming in, repetitive riff. They add a little bit of hi-hat. The greatest thing about Alt J is that the lack of fear for space. So even though they're finding ways to constantly make complex soundscapes by just through addition, but there's still space between each additional line that they put into the track. That's a talent that not everybody has. The next track, Breeze Blocks, that was the first. I heard that like on the radio late one night. And Shazammed it. I'm like, what the hell is this song? Because that's an interesting piece of music. So Newman gave an interview on what this song is about lyrically. He gave the interview to Interview Magazine, and he says the song is about liking someone who you want so much that you want to hurt yourself and them as well. We related that idea to Where the Wild Things Are, which we all grew up reading, where in the end the bees say, "Oh, please don't go. We'll eat you whole. We love you so." That they would threaten cannibalism to have that person. That's a powerful image. That's what Newman says. So already these lyrics are pretty interesting. What I like about the lyrics in this one is that there's a hook, but they only do the refrain once. You'd think if you wrote a refrain, a chorus, you want to repeat it. One, because to make it catchier, or why waste perfectly good material just doing it once? Breeze Blocks is a perfect example of the building up that tension through addition. They start with the guitar, that nasal vocal comes in. Then they add in the drums, but they're always so sparse. And then they have like the Celeste coming in, and they keep the intensity keeps building up because they put in this driving bass line. But it kind of turns into like an Arctic Monkeys vibe because the bass line is the driving force. Nothing's changed in terms of the motif, but the addition to the bass line is what's driving the whole song along. And there's so much counterpoint. Counterpoint meaning that there's the melody and you have like basically an anti-melody, like something that fits on top of it. It's just harmony, but it's not harmony in terms of you're just playing one note over all of the melody, but the fact that the counter melody is equally as interesting, equally adds to the whole ensemble. That's what I'm referring to when I say counterpoint. It's just absolute subtle additions to the groove that it's set up in the beginning. And what's crazy is another example that this is minimalism is that there's no harmonic movement whatsoever. They stay in the same harmonic neighborhood. They're not changing keys or anything. But who cares? Because it's good. The song Something Good, that's a really good example of the Philip Glass idea. Philip Glass does a lot of his pieces are piano pieces because he's a piano player, but he'll kind of have these little grooves and he just kind of sits on them and he's sitting there playing piano, grooving out, doing the same thing over and over again. And then he'll kind of decide when he feels it, he'll kind of change to that next groove that he has on it. Usually it's kind of just changing one note and it's still sitting on the same rhythm. That's what I hear in the piano lines for the song Something Good. Matilda, that's another example of repetition of simple motifs that don't go anywhere, that don't change. That's definitely minimalism. And then on Matilda, man, that nasally quality to the vocals, that makes that song. If you sang that song any other way, it wouldn't have the same emotion behind it. And I'm going to point to Fitch Pleasure as my favorite track on the album. Because you can hear so well that the minimalist approach to how they do their song structure, not only in the vocals but in the music as well. I have a quote here from Richard Ruda saying that minimalist music utilizes repetitive melodic patterns, consonant harmonies, motoric rhythms, and a deliberate striving for oral beauty. That's this song, Fitch Pleasure. Because you've got the vocal intro. That's kind of on that cantus firmus thing I was talking about with the Gregorian chant, and you add something on top of it. But he's using that nasal voice timbre, which makes all J stick out. And then they add it with a heavy bass saw wave synth. So one of the example that if you listen, and this album is definitely designed to be listened to front to back. If anybody has listened to me before or understands what I enjoy listening to albums, is that if you want me to sit there from the start to the end, I'll give you that attention. Take me on that journey. And J definitely designed this album to be listened to and consumed in that manner. In this track, Fitch Pleasure, let's do that use of space and contrast to emphasize the sound wave. So when the saw wave comes in, it's not overbearing. It just kind of fits in the pocket. That's a talent that bands don't have, to be able to put a new piece into the groove you've already established, and then not muddy it up, to not take away from the other, but to be like, oh yeah, that was sitting there the whole time. They just had it on mute. And then they have this like surf guitar sound. Surf meaning like, that Cali sound. That's where I'm getting Sublime. I'm getting the Green. I'm getting Revolution. I'm getting that Cali sound. Added in with this weird acapella, classical music, vocal stuff. Simple dance drum beats, strained synth, piano lines, using Celeste. I mean, it's just, I didn't expect this sound. I haven't really heard this sound before. In terms of how they've combined all of their influences to create something completely original. If you listen to this, you're gonna be like, that's an J song. Oh, that's J. That's hard to do. That's so hard to do. And I can respect that. Overall, this album by J, because they're not afraid of space, because they use this nasally vocal technique, and they're basically a groove band, just using repetitive riffs. They're pulling from minimalism. They're not afraid to sit in pockets that other producers would say, this sounds stagnant. J has the ability to say, no, it's not. Just give me 10 more seconds. I'm going to do just a little change, and you're going to go, oh yeah, we were waiting for that. Definitely check out this album. So let's go on to the dollar throwback. The dollar throwback. This one. So the story behind this, it's Airwaves. It's the name of the band. And the album is entitled New Day. I had never heard of this band at all. I was in the record store the other day and going through the dollar section, and I saw the album cover, and I'm like, what the hell is this? It looks like before they had like a whole bunch of satellites up in the air, so they didn't really have like pictures of Jupiter, so they would have like artist renderings of it. That kind of like that art scene, that futuristic kind of like 60s, early 70s way they were drawing stuff. Well, that's what this album cover is. And you're looking at like on the right side, it looks like a lava planet. And then like on the left, there's like these like buildings, like futuristic buildings that are like half triangle, rectangles. So it's clearly some futuristic bullshit. It's got like two moons. You're like, oh, we're in another planet or something. There's a volcano in the background. But then you look further at the buildings, and you're like, oh, these buildings are like falling apart. There's holes in them. So you're questioning like, what the heck? So it's just like post-apocalyptic nuclear waste. I don't even know. You're just looking at like, it's just eye catching. And then I noticed it was by A&M Records. I said, well, for $1, let's check it out. It was recorded in Wales. So they're a British band, but they recorded in 1977. And they're called pop rock. But, I mean, the first track, when I put it on, I was like, I was not expecting this. It's like this weird, like, mix of country, like 70s, like late 70s country, and pop, and like rock. It's so strange. And then like the bass player on all these tracks are like, he's pretty funky. Like, wow, this guy can play. But then the way they do their backing vocals is like this Bee Gee thing. We're like, what? Why are you doing it like that? Every song on this album, you're like, what the hell? Why would you even do that? and then clearly, like I was saying before, they have this like, oh look, we got this new toy. It's a Casio. Let's just use it. Ain't this really neat? On these electronic stuff we have in the studio, let's use that. I'm like, okay, buddy, yeah, what a nice new toy you had there. But then, so that's track 1, and then track 2, it's this like saccharine sweet poppy song that sounds like a George Harrison pop tune. You're like, where are you getting it? Well, you can't just start with this funky electronica country rock thing and then you give me a George Harrison song. And then track 3, it starts out with like a cat meowing. The song's called The Cat, but it's like this weird, it's that 7/8 southern country rock thing, but then the bass line's incredible. And so you're like, well, who are these people? And then they add in these like electric pianos. Once again, they're like, hey, check out our new Casio that the studio's letting us borrow. And then the rest of the album is just like a bunch of ballads that sounds like Kansas. And what's crazy, so the title of the album is New Day. And so I'm assuming that their title track is called You Are the New Day. But it's a 2-minute vocal a cappella composition. It's just, who are these random people? And then there's like, but the vocal counterpoint, it's just like, Jesus, these guys are good. Like you would just not, with the things they've given you before, they're giving you this country pop rock, they're giving you Bee Gee falsettos, they're giving you George Harrison saccharine sweet pop, they got a cat meowing, and they were giving you Kansas sweet ballad tunes, and then all of a sudden we're going to do an a cappella with incredible vocal counterpoint, but also clearly somebody had a new toy, and so the new toy is they're doing like this little filter, like a light little like high pass filter on, it's probably a low pass if I think about it, on the vocal. And you're like, It's just okay. And then after that, then like somehow they must have been listening to The Who, because all of a sudden there's like a lot more drive in the music. Like, well, who the heck are you guys? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Like there's a track, Don't Let the Daylight In. Man, there's so much 70s electronic techniques in that. What's fun is you listen to music from that time and you hear these techniques, you're like, man, everybody does that. But back then, no. They were one of the first ones doing it. And they're like, aren't we so cool? Check this out. I'm sure people were listening to it going, what? It's crazy. Why does it sound like that? I've never heard. So, yeah, the band is called Airwaves. And the album's called New Day. They only had 2 albums. The lead singer, he was in a bunch of other bands. But I had the damnedest time trying to find any information on Airwaves, because they didn't really have any radio hits, which is kind of surprising, because some of the tracks on this album, I'm like, well, I don't understand why that would have hit in 78, when they released the album. But if you're looking for some interesting music, just something that you're like, what are these guys thinking? Why is this so good? I'm so confused the entire time I'm listening to it. Then, and it's on Spotify too, which is great. I had to check. I'm like, how is it I can't find any information on where these guys are from, other than that they're British? And then Spotify has them. You just type in Airwaves, New Day. It's right there. And the other album that they did too. I think like Spotify, I think the Needle Drop said it one time, Spotify is just like a dump yard of just music. There's just too much there. You can just dig and you find anything. Alright, well, hope you all enjoyed that. Hopefully it wasn't as much as a usual rant that I do. Be sure to check out our YouTube page. Click subscribe, leave a comment. regsec808@gmail.com. Drop us a line if you have any comments, suggestions on albums or music we should be reviewing in the future. Also got the Facebook page, Regsec808 Productions. Give us a like on there. And then don't forget, we got the Twitter at Regsec808. Got them all covered. Drop us a line. Tell us what we need to do. Little suggestions, constructive criticism. Yeah. Until next time.